You want to know the scariest thing a senior guard ever told me? It wasn't about the rifle. It wasn't about the crowds or the bombs or the terrorists. It was something quieter, something that got under my skin like a splinter you can't see, but you feel every time you move your hand. He said, if you feel anything, you're already compromised. I didn't understand it at first. Thought he meant fear, or anger, or maybe the cold. But I learned. Oh, I learned. Let me tell you about the day it finally made sense. The morning started like any other Tuesday in late October. Gray sky, that damp London cold that doesn't bother announcing itself. It just slips inside your coat like an old friend who forgot to knock. I was standing near the Canada Gate, that big bronze and stone entrance that leads up to Buckingham Palace. Not a guard myself. Never was. I was just a tourist liaison that year, working for one of the private security firms the palace contracts during high season. My job was simple. Keep people from doing stupid things near the soldiers. You'd be surprised how many stupid things people try. By 10:47 a.m., the crowd had thickened into that familiar London stew. Japanese schoolgirls in matching navy blazers, a retired couple from Ohio wearing matching fanny packs, 3 drunk Australians who thought the changing of the guard was a personal comedy show just for them. The usual. The air smelled like fried onions from a street cart near the Victoria Memorial, and that specific wet wool smell you only get in England when autumn decides to punish you for summer. The guard that day was a young Scots guardsman. Nameplate said Fletcher, 22 years old, maybe. Face like a closed door. You know the look. Those boys train themselves to see through people, not at them. He stood outside the sentry box near the center of the forecourt, perfectly still except for the slow practice turn every 20 minutes. Left. Pause. Right. Pause. The bearskin hat sat on his head like a small, furry planet. His rifle, ceremonial but real, always real, rested against his shoulder. I was leaning against the railing, sipping coffee from a paper cup that had already gone lukewarm, when I noticed the first crack in the morning. A woman near the front of the barriers. Mid-30s. Dark coat. Hair pulled back, so tight it looked like it hurt. She wasn't taking photos. That was the first thing. Everyone takes photos. Every single person in that crowd had a phone up, except her. She was just watching. Not the palace. Not the guard. Watching the other tourists. I've been doing this job long enough to trust my gut. And my gut said, something's off. Build tension. I pushed off the railing and started walking slow along the barrier line, keeping her in my peripheral. The crowd was doing that lazy shuffle people do when they're bored but pretending to be fascinated. A little boy dropped his ice cream. His mother sighed like she'd been personally betrayed by the universe. 2 Japanese girls did a peace sign photo in front of the Queen Victoria statue. Normal. 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 But the woman in the dark coat, she moved. Not toward the guard. Toward the barrier. The metal waist-high fence that separates the public from the forecourt. She rested both hands on it. Leaned forward just a little. Her lips moved, but I was too far to hear what she said. I radioed it in. Low voice. Possible situation at the center barrier. Female, dark coat, 30s. No camera. Watching the sentry. The response came back from the shift lead. A guy named Barnes who'd been doing royal security since the 80s and had the face to prove it. Observe only. Do not engage unless she crosses. So I observed. That's when I noticed the guard. Fletcher. He hadn't moved, technically, but there was something different in the set of his shoulders. The way his weight shifted almost imperceptibly onto his back foot. He'd seen her too, and he was ready. The crowd, of course, noticed nothing. They were too busy elbowing each other for better angles, complaining about the price of bottled water, arguing about whether the palace had too many windows or not enough. But then the woman did something that made my stomach drop. She reached into her coat pocket. Slow, deliberate, not like someone grabbing a phone, like someone checking that something is still there. Her eyes never left Fletcher, and his eyes, I could see them now, even from 50 feet away, were locked on her hands. I started walking faster. The rule is simple. No one approaches the sentry. No one touches the guard. No one distracts them, because that rifle isn't just for show. And those soldiers aren't just actors in a pageant. They're trained to respond to a threat in under 2 seconds. 2 seconds. That's all it takes for a tourist to become a headline. The woman pulled her hand out of her pocket. Empty. But she was smiling now. Not a happy smile. Something thinner. Something that looked like it had been practiced in a bathroom mirror. She called out, loud enough for me to hear, loud enough for the people around her to turn. You're just a boy, she said. You don't even know why you're here. Fletcher didn't blink, didn't move. His face could have been carved from the same stone as the palace walls. A few tourists laughed nervously. The Australians whispered to each other. One of the Japanese girls lowered her phone and looked confused. I was 30 feet away now. Ma'am, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Ma'am, I need you to step back from the barrier. She ignored me like I was a gum wrapper on the sidewalk. Her eyes stayed on Fletcher, and then she started walking. Not fast, not running, just walking along the barrier toward the end of it, toward the gap where the metal fence opens for authorized personnel. Toward him. Part 2 climax, I broke into a jog. Radioed again. She's moving toward the access point. I need backup. Barnes's voice crackled back. Do not let her cross. Repeat. Do not let her cross. The crowd was starting to notice now. That ripple effect you see at concerts when something goes wrong. Heads turning, conversation stopping, phones slowly lowering as people realize this isn't part of the show. The Australians went quiet. The Ohio couple stopped taking photos and started gripping each other's arms. The woman reached the gap in the barrier. A simple chain across 2 posts. She unhooked it like she'd done it 100 times before. Stepped through, onto the forecourt. Now it was real. Now she was inside the perimeter. Now Fletcher had every legal and tactical right to raise that rifle. He didn't. Not yet. His training held. He tracked her with his eyes, but kept the rifle at his shoulder, muzzle pointed at the ground. The rule is, you don't escalate unless the threat escalates. She wasn't running. She wasn't holding a weapon. She was just walking toward him, like she was crossing a parking lot to get to her car. I was 10 feet behind her now, heart hammering so hard I could feel in my temples. Ma'am, stop. You are in a restricted area. If you take one more step, you will be detained. She stopped, turned around, and looked at me. Her eyes were wet. Not crying, just wet, like she'd been standing in the rain for hours, even though the sky was dry. She had a small scar on her left cheek, a thin white line old, and she smelled like cigarettes and lavender hand lotion. I just want to talk to him, she said. Quiet, almost polite. I just wanted to look at me. He can't, I said. He's on duty. You need to come back behind the barrier. She shook her head. Slow, like we were having a perfectly reasonable conversation about the weather. He looks at everyone else, she said. He looks at the tourists. He looks at the birds. He looks at the cars. But he won't look at me. I've been coming here for 3 months. 3 months. And he won't look at me. 3 months. That hit me like a slap. 3 months meant she wasn't spontaneous. She wasn't confused. She was planned. And planned people are the ones you worry about. Behind her, Fletcher still hadn't moved. But I saw his jaw tighten, a muscle twitching near his left ear. He'd heard her. He knew who she was. And that meant this wasn't their first interaction. Barnes arrived with 2 uniformed officers. They moved in slow, hands visible, the way you approach a stray dog that might bite or might just want to be left alone. The crowd was fully watching now. Someone was filming. Someone else was yelling at their kid to get back. A siren wailed somewhere beyond the palace gates. Unrelated probably, but it added to the noise. The woman turned back to Fletcher. Took one more step. You feel something, she said to him. I know you do. I see in your shoulders. You're not made of stone. You're just pretending. And then, this is the part one still dream about sometimes, Fletcher spoke. Guards aren't supposed to speak. Not on duty. Not to the public. Their job is to be silent, still, and terrifying in their stillness. But Fletcher opened his mouth, and his voice came out low and rough like someone who hadn't spoken in days. Step back, please. For words. That's all. No anger. No threat. Just a request, wrapped in uniform and duty and the weight of a rifle he was still not raising. The woman laughed. Not a mean laugh. Something sadder. Something that made the hair on my arms stand up. Please, she repeated. That's the first nice thing you've said to me. All those other times, you just stared. Just stare like I was a lamp or a tree or something that didn't matter. Barnes reached her first. Took her elbow. Gentle but firm. "Ma'am, you're coming with us." She didn't fight. Didn't scream. Didn't pull away. She just kept her eyes on Fletcher as the officers walked her back toward the barrier. And right before she stepped through the gap, she said one more thing. Quiet. Almost to herself. "You'll think about me tonight. When you're alone. You'll feel something. And then you'll know I was right." They took her away. Put her in a car. Drove off. The crowd clapped, because crowds are stupid and don't know what they're applauding, and then slowly went back to taking photos of the palace like nothing had happened. Resolution, I stayed in the forecourt for another hour. Made sure the chain was back on the barrier. Talked to the Australians, who thought the whole thing was bloody brilliant theater. Assured the Ohio couple that no, this wasn't normal, and yes, they were safe. But my eyes kept drifting back to Fletcher. He was still standing in the sentry box. Still perfectly still. Still wearing that face like a mask. But something had changed. Something small. His shoulders were just slightly higher than before. His grip on the rifle was just slightly tighter. He wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. He was looking at the spot where she'd stood. The spot where she'd crossed. At noon, his relief arrived. Another guardsman, taller, older, with a thin red mustache and a face that looked like it had seen worse. They did the handover. Silent. Professional. Fletcher stepped out of the sentry box, rifle still at his shoulder, and walked toward the guardhouse near the side gate. I followed. Not close. Just nearby. He disappeared inside. Came out 5 minutes later without the bearskin, without the rifle. Just a young man in a gray t-shirt and combat trousers, carrying a plastic bag with his lunch. He sat on a low wall near the back of the guardhouse, facing away from the palace, away from the crowd. Lia cigarette. His hands were shaking. I sat down next to him. Didn't say anything for a while. He smoked. I watched a pigeon peck at a discarded chip wrapper. The city hummed in the background. Buses, sirens, a helicopter somewhere. Finally, he spoke. "She's been out there every Tuesday for 12 weeks. I nodded. First time she tried to talk to me was week 3. I ignored her. That's the job. You ignore. You don't react. You don't feel. He took a long drag on the cigarette. Exhaled. The smoke curled up into the gray sky, like a question mark. Week 6, she brought flowers. Laid them on the ground in front of the barrier. Just left them there. For me. I had to watch the duty officer pick them up and throw them in the bin. He stubbed out the cigarette. Lit another one immediately. Week 9, she started crying. Just stood there behind the barrier, crying. And I couldn't do anything. Couldn't say anything. Couldn't even look at her. Because that's the rule. That's the whole damn rule. I thought about what Barnes had told me once during training. About how the hardest part of the job isn't the danger. It's the discipline. The discipline of not being human when every cell in your body is screaming at you to be human. Fletcher looked at me. For the first time, I saw how young he really was. Just a kid. A kid in a uniform that weighed more than his body. She was right, though, he said. About the feeling. About tonight. I'm going to go back to my room, and I'm going to sit on my bed, and I'm going to think about her. And I'm going to feel something. And that's going to mean, he stopped. Swallowed. That's going to mean I'm compromised. Part 3 ending line, I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't say anything. I just sat there on the low wall with a 22-year-old soldier who'd done everything right and still felt like he'd lost. After a while, the older guardsman, the one with the red mustache, came out of the guardhouse. He didn't look at me. Walked straight to Fletcher. Stood over him. Waited. Fletcher looked up. Nodded. Got to his feet. The older man put a hand on his shoulder. Not hard. Not soft. Just there. The way you steady someone without admitting they need steadying. You did your job today, the older man said. She crossed. You didn't. That's the only line that matters. Fletcher nodded again, but his eyes were still wet. Not crying. Just wet. Like the woman's had been. The older man glanced at me, then back at Fletcher. And then he said the words I've never been able to forget. The words that finally made sense of everything. Listen to me, son. You're going to feel like hell tonight. You're going to lie awake and run it through your head 100 times. Could you have done something different? Should you have said something? Should you have looked at her just once just to give her that much. He paused. The wind picked up, rattling the chains on the barrier. The answer is no. You did exactly what you were trained to do. And that feeling in your chest right now, that guilt, that doubt. He leaned in, lowered his voice so only Fletcher could hear. But I was close enough. If you feel anything, you're already compromised. Fletcher closed his eyes, took a breath, held it. Then he opened his eyes, straightened his shoulders, and walked back toward the guardhouse. He didn't look back at the palace, didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at me. He just walked. And I sat there on that wall for a long time after he was gone, watching the tourists take their photos, listening to the Australians laugh about something, smelling the fried onions and the wet wool and the cold London air. I thought about the woman in the dark coat, about what breaks a person enough to stand outside a palace for 3 months, begging a stranger to look at them, about what breaks a person enough to stand inside that palace for 3 months, pretending not to see. And I thought about what the older man said. If you feel anything, you're already compromised. But here's the thing I've never been able to shake. The thing that keeps me up some nights when I remember that October Tuesday. If feeling something means you're compromised, then where are you supposed to be? A machine? A statue? A closed door? Because Fletcher wasn't any of those things. He was just a kid who did his job, a kid who followed the rules, a kid who went home that night and sat on his bed and thought about a woman who only wanted to be seen. And that feeling he had, that heavy, aching, human feeling, wasn't a failure of his training. It was proof that he was still alive. The problem is, in that job, alive isn't always the point. The point is the uniform. The point is the rifle. The point is the silence and the stillness and the slow practice turn every 20 minutes. Left. Pause. Right? Pause. The point is to be a symbol, not a person. And symbols don't feel anything. So when the senior guard told Fletcher, if you feel anything, you're already compromised, he wasn't giving advice. He was giving a warning about what the job takes from you, about the price of standing still while the world moves around you, about the long, slow, quiet way that duty carves out the soft parts of a person until there's nothing left but the uniform. I don't know what happened to Fletcher after that day. I transferred to a different post a few months later, but sometimes on cold October mornings I think about him. I think about the woman. I think about that gray sky and that wet wool smell and the sound of a young man's voice saying, "Step back, please." And I wonder if either of them ever found a way to feel something without it costing them everything. Probably not. Probably they're both still out there, somewhere, one behind a barrier, one in front of it, waiting for someone to finally look. But that's the thing about duty, isn't it? It doesn't care if you're human. It only cares that you stand still. And if you feel anything while you're standing there, anything at all, then you've already lost. You're already compromised.